really an email that was addressed to the mayor and I think some of the other commissioners. But he sent a courtesy copy to us because we had addressed some of the matters that I think he's bringing up here sometime last year. So I'll just note that for the record. Hang on 1 second, please. Okay, so just as a means of introduction, I'm going to let you know that today we're going to be working exclusively on old business, the tree ordinance. I'm hoping that we can hammer out some substantive work product on this issue. We've been focusing on it for over a year now, and I think we're to a point where we might be able to make some meaningful strides. But before we get to that, I have one organizational issue that I want to address. We have a vacancy, and I'm terming it a vacancy. Julie Davis has had to resign because of some family situations. And so for everybody that's here, I'm interested in getting suggestions. I've already raised this, but I'm interested in getting suggestions on a possible replacement for her. And then B, as luck would have it, Julie has been our point person on the tree ordinance. And so what I want to do, at least for a moment or two here, is to inquire as to how we might address this void going forward. So I'm open to either A, a volunteer, or B, some suggestions about how we might proceed in her absence. So everybody's talking at once. Okay, nobody has a thought? Gene, have you got a thought about how we might do this?
I think based on what I see here, we're going to be pretty much through with what
okay.
done today. Maybe we don't need anybody.
All right, I like that attitude. That's good.
Are you talking about replacing somebody specifically to work on the tree ordinance, or replacing in general?
Well, A, as I said, we're looking to fill that vacancy. So, but no, not necessarily. I don't think it would be fair to bring somebody on and say, okay, you're in charge of the tree ordinance after we've done it for a year. No, I'm wondering whether one of the three of you would be willing to step up and take that responsibility. Was that a yes?
No, that's a no. I'm so sorry.
Boy, you've organized the whole
It's
thing.
like,
all kidding aside, you've got your whole thing up
okay.
there. I think you should run it.
Okay, well, that's very nice platitude there. But the problem is, you know, I've spent a considerable amount of time getting this thing organized, and I spent a considerable amount of time doing just the organizational administrative part of this thing, of running this committee. And so I guess my response is it's too much, and I'm looking for some help. Now, as Gene says, I think, you know, let's see what happens. I'm not surprised that I'm not getting people jumping up and down here. So I'm of the mind that yes, we can stroll forward as we go through this. I think for each one of these items that we're going to address hopefully today, you will step forward and provide me with essentially something I can just fill in the blanks on these things that I've got up on the various sections. So
I think we should see where we actually get with this today.
Today,
as far
okay.
as what we've already done.
Okay.
Before we make a decision.
I'm good with it. All right.
Well, in a perfect world, if we knew where we were going after the tree ordinance, it would help us pick, the next member.
Yeah, that's another organizational discussion we need to have.
Exactly. I mean, it would have been really nice to have a tree expert for the past year to work on this.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right. Before I dive in, I do want to offer the opportunity if somebody is interested in making a citizen comment this morning. So, Patty? No?
I'm came here to really listen to what you have to say.
All right.
The mic comes Can you come up to the microphone?
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. If you want to, we'll give you an opportunity later on as we go through this. So, all right. Thank you all very much. All right, let's jump in. So I assume everybody's got a copy of this document that I've put up on the screen here. And for those of you in the audience, I hope you can read that okay. As I mentioned to Ann, if she was showing me how to put that up there, I've actually made a couple of changes this morning. So it's not, what's up there is what I sent you, but it's, and I'll note as we go through this, some of the changes that I've made.
Is Miss Lingo coming today?
I'm sorry?
Is Miss Lingo coming
Yes,
today?
and I wanted to thank you for reminding me. Yes, she's been directed to limit the amount of time that she provides to us. Actually, the two of us have. And so I sent her an email the other day asking if she would come at 10:30. So what I'm hoping to do is to wade through these things, and then to the extent that, there's issues that we need her advice on, we'll note it, and then when she gets here, we'll talk to her about it. Okay? Everybody good with that so far? Good? All right. So, I'm just going to start right out. I've reorganized the structure of this thing. I'm having some issues with some of the provisions which might better be retitled as article numbers, or however we want to describe it, descriptors. So, for example, for the first, let's see, looks like about 6 different provisions at the beginning of this thing. We might create a separate article to identify that, and I'll just throw this out here as administration, and then picking up after or at what is shown as as 253.7, trees on public property. We might call that a separate article, or Article 2 maybe, and so on and so forth. There's another couple of them as we go through this. So if anybody has a thought on that or a different way to approach, I wasn't quite sure how to demark these things, so I just kind of put it in as a separate provision, but it might be better if we set them up as separate articles. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I think from what I've looked at, you're on the right track, because I think defining trees and then talking about the creation of the commission seems to be sort of fast backwards.
Okay, I'm happy to move this,
and I'm
the pieces around as well. So
I'm not so sure that it wouldn't be better as we go along to maybe divide the stuff up to fit administrative and practical and procedural and whatever.
I'm totally open to that. So if, for example, you want to move, I'm also changing the name of the Parks and Shade Tree, with due respect, Tony, to that name to simplify it and maybe give it a little more focus on what we're trying to achieve here. But if you want to move that either forward or move other things forward, I'm totally open to that. So why don't we see if we can walk through the first 3 of these things, and if there's no big deal, we'll then address that. Okay, Gene?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So findings is the first item that I've suggested here, 253.1, and I think I'm not even clear on how this evolves, but my understanding is that once there's a resolution passed by the Board of Commissioners, that is restated as an element of the regulation itself. So I don't know that we need to do anything. I think they'll fill in that blank. Everybody good with that?
Wait, you're losing me just a little bit.
I'm sorry.
So you're starting at the very beginning, right? And you're basically asking if we're good with the public tree definition?
No, I'm starting
Where
with,
did you start? I'm confused.
if you look up,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Did you get this document that I
Yep.
sent out?
Yep,
I
yep,
don't
yep,
think that's
okay.
it, is it?
No, that's the one that I did with Liz. I was.
Oh, that's your stuff.
I'm looking for
Okay.
the 4
All
sections
right,
that
so-
I did.
So just
Yeah.
look up
Okay,
at the screen up there.
all right, gotcha.
And so that's 253.1 in the Hoyte Decker songbook. And it's identified as findings.
Yeah.
Good. So you okay with that, Susan?
No, I'm still not.
Okay.
I'm just slow here.
All right.
Okay, so
Take your time.
what is this?
That is a specific suggestion that I'm going to make as we go through this. That's a document that, yeah, that's been posted.
So this
On the website.
253-1
Yeah.
says definitions. Yours 253-1, you're
This-
proposing to
this-
say findings?
What's up on the monitor is a newer version of what you're looking at in your right hand.
Okay, so, okay, gotcha. All right. Okay,
But that will come up in a minute or two, what you have in your hand.
okay. So this is basically Article 1.
Well, I'm just throwing that out as a possible way to organize this thing. We've got 3 different issues that we're addressing here, at least that's what I'm proposing. One is trees on public property. Well, administration is what I'm calling this first thing, which would encompass the duties of the definitions, the duties of the city arborist, the functions, I guess, if we're going to take Gene's suggestion, which I'm open to, the functions of what has been called the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, and encapsulate that in this first administrative article, okay? And then there are 3 articles after that. I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of it for you. One is trees on public property. The second one is, there's some overlap here, so it's trees on public and private property. And then the final one is trees on private property.
All right, so right now you're in Article 1.
And right now, I'm at the beginning of this thing, and if you
You're
want to call it
proposing
Article 1, I'm good with it.
That the first thing listed is
Right where
Article
that
1.
magnifying glass is. It's just right where it says 253.1.
Okay,
And we would plug in there Article 1. And again, I'm open, administration.
okay, gotcha,
All right?
gotcha.
That the wording that you're gonna plug in there, is that coming from the old 253-21?
Yes, that's what he said.
Okay.
Okay.
So I don't know, to answer your question.
That's what you wrote.
Because I think what happens, you tell me, you're the lawyer. I think what happens is when they pass these things, they have a set of findings.
Right.
And as part of their decision, the Board of Commissioners decides, this is what we're gonna do, and that's their findings. And that then is embodied as the provision, which we will call 253.1.
Yeah, but no, I agree. And I think it should be at the beginning. At the
You think
beginning.
it should be at the beginning?
Well, that's where you got it.
What comes before 1?
No, in the findings, there should be the basis for the authority of the,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was just gonna say, when I looked at 253-21, which has the findings in the old one,
Yeah.
those sections are basically all right, except that I would say in paragraph A, when it mentions the comprehensive development plan, shouldn't mention a specific one, it should mention the generic one. So that we don't have to rewrite it every time. There's a new comprehensive development plan.
Okay, well, I'm certainly good with that. Are you proposing a specific set of terms?
No, I'm basically
the-
proposing that we just not refer to a specific development plan, but refer to the comprehensive development plan as currently in effect in the city or something like that. You don't want to be stuck with the one done in 2003 or 2004.
Okay, forgive me, I'm struggling to understand what you're saying. Do you mean by that it would be something that we craft, or is it something that we would rely on the Board of Commissioners to decide and put into?
Depends, are we writing something that we're going to present to them?
So we would do it?
That's what I would think, yes.
Okay. And is that substantially different than what already exists?
No, the only thing that would be different would be the reference to the 2003.
To the numbers and the dates and
The
that.
CDP, right.
Okay. All right, so if that's acceptable to the two of you, I'm open to that. And I will, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna, as I said earlier, I'm gonna fill in the blanks on all of these things. So I will put in content that mirrors what's in there now and simply update it with the appropriate dates and numbers as would be applicable. Okay, is that acceptable to everybody? Good. All right. One down, what, 38 to go? Good. All right, we're just flying right along here. All right, so, and then as to purpose, are you seeing that being embodied in the findings part of it, Gene?
Yeah, I would say it would be fine, yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Would that be part of 253.1, a new 253.1, or would we separate it and identify it as 253.2?
That's completely cosmetic, I don't really care.
Okay, so I'm gonna leave it at 2. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Just going here. Think we can do 9:30? All right, applicability. All right, decision time. Well, if you can see that up on the monitor, if you have some thoughts, again, no change works for me, or this is language that came out of a red line document that, I don't know whether it was Brian Patterson himself or whether it was a product of the Planning Commission itself. I just came across it, and unfortunately it's not further identified, but I'm throwing that out there for whatever you guys think.
I'm confused where your sourcing is.
The source, as I said, there was
No, the 253-26 to 21 formally.
Oh, no, those are just those are references to the provision numbers itself. That's all that is.
Well, I know, but I'm trying to see what you were originally looking at.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Well, you did a great job
For
on this, by the way.
applicability, are you
But I'm not
looking
sure
at
where you're-
253-23 as
Yeah.
as for wording, or you're just
Yes.
saying this is where it drops in?
It would be either or. No, we either go with 223 as it stands now, or we consider a change that is something that the Planning Commission, or at least Brian Patterson, may have suggested.
I think what's confusing us is we didn't decide exactly what's gonna be in these sections that we're figuring out where they're gonna go. I think that's kind of where I was lost. I thought we were still at figuring out what exactly was gonna be in each section.
We're going to get to that. I mean,
It might be easier to figure out what exactly they're gonna say before we figure out where we're gonna put them. Does that make any sense?
Okay.
But I mean, you had this all in your head and you did a phenomenal job. So if you have it in your head, I think we just don't have it in our head the way you're doing it.
Okay.
Everything that I have is written up with the way things used to be in order. And unfortunately, if it wasn't a section we talked about changing, I don't have it.
Well, do you have a copy of the,
Existing tree ordinance?
yeah. Can you pull that up on your screen?
Yeah, okay. So, all right. Okay, so basically, just so I'm clear, you're taking the sections, all the sections of the existing tree code, reordering them, and then we're discussing what's in them
Correct.
as we go along at the same time.
Correct.
But anything that's not changed isn't on the screen up here.
Well, I've noted it though. So for example,
Okay.
under purpose, I've said no change.
Okay, gotcha.
So what you see, if you look at 253.22, I would carry that forward under this new
Okay.
253.2.
All right, I got it.
So
I think
I'm just going to say for the vast array of people who were in the audience today, that if you want to join in and offer your comments, you're welcome to. So I want to.
So just from somebody in the audience.
Yeah.
Basically,
Identify yourself.
Paul Coons. This is what I think you were referring to before, Susan, and it's different. So just from my perspective, basically what you're saying is 253.1, which right now is definitions,
Right,
okay, will now be 253.1 findings, and in the findings, you'll just pull up what's formerly from 21.
Correct.
Yes.
And so the findings, the purpose goes somewhere else, and we haven't talked about that yet.
But it's going to go next.
Yep.
okay.
And again, purpose comes from 22, but what I'm saying, the definitions is somewhere else down in the
That's right.
document.
Correct.
I was just confused.
And
I think
Susan?
kind of like what Susan
Okay.
was.
I think what's a little confusing is.
We're kind of
in the
starting
packet-
over,
Yeah.
but a
Yeah.
lot of it's already.
I think what's confusing is I don't have the copy of the tree ordinance here in front of me on paper. It's on here.
No, I'd asked
So-
actually to have.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I'm confused about.
did you get that message? I had asked for a hard copy of the tree ordinance.
Okay, all right.
All right, but
So
but
we're gonna have
anyway,
to jump back.
the
to
other
this.
thing that's confusing, Susan, I think,
Okay.
unless my packet was just deficient, is that the material in the packet that is supposed to be the markup by the planning commission where they compared their work to the existing, Brian Patterson took the work of the planning commission, is not complete. This piece of paper, the page is missing.
If I can clarify.
All right, now I got it.
What I've submitted to put up on the agenda are my Hoyte Decker's proposed changes to either the
Pardon
original.
me, I'm talking about this document that was in our packet.
Yeah, that's
Their
what was
page is
confusing
missing.
me.
That's what's confusing.
Yeah,
Oh,
Because when you go to look at, that's why I
well,
pulled.
that might be my error
No,
too.
no, that's why I
don't know.
pulled up what I have online here. Excuse me, in my own materials here, because when you said applicability, option 2 was to follow the planning commission. We don't have that section in our packet of materials.
Right.
This
No, that's right.
provision.
That's right. I'm telling you, I just did this.
No, this document is deficient.
Yeah,
It was in
okay.
our,
That could be.
but it is here,
Okay.
and now I see this is exactly what the planning commission
Okay.
proposed.
so once we get past these first few, we're gonna be good, because they're gonna be the ones that we actually talked about, so we're good. All right, go ahead, we're good. We're good.
Where are we?
All right, we are
All
all
right.
awake now on the same
We're
page.
down to number 39 now, right? No.
Okay. All right, so anything that's not changed, we're just moving around.
All right, so I'm still, as far as I know, I'm still discussing what I'm proposing to be 253.3 applicability. And my question is, do we want to leave it as it is? Or do we want to adopt something, do we want to adopt the second option, which is what I believe the Planning Commission and/or Brian Patterson have recommended, Or I guess a third option would be something that we create ourselves right now. I'm comfortable either way or any way.
I think in a way, Hoyt, you may want to come back to this section.
Okay.
Because the references of the applicability of this code in the Planning Commission document refer to specific activities and specific sections as they drafted. And the provision in the current code, for example, this addresses violation of 25326. And so we've got a lot of sort of cross-references here. I think maybe we ought to come back to this section and say, once we've figured out what the tree code is, then we can say what it's applicable to.
Fine.
In other words, we figure out what the content is, and then we come back and shuffle.
Okay.
Right, that's kind of what I was
Exactly.
thinking.
Okay, that
All
makes
right.
sense.
Hang on.
That's the way we've been handling it from the beginning, is we were attacking one section at a time. And I don't think we finished doing that. So to start moving them around is
Okay.
a little confusing, or
All right.
immature maybe.
All right, so now I'm going to move on to what I'm identifying as 253.4. If I can manipulate this monitor. And I will note that, I don't know how to do this. Oop. Oh, I'm wild. The definition section, I went too far, didn't I? I'm sorry. Just like the applicability part, I don't know what to do here. Are issues that we will address later, and I've already spoken about this at previous meetings. That what am I doing, Coach?
Is it not working? I know what you do.
At previous meetings, I've suggested that we would go through our different provisions and then decide to what extent definitions needed to be modified, added, or deleted. So all we've got here is there's like 3 or 4 definitions. Hang on a second. Let me see. Oh. Why don't we make 3 copies of this thing and spread it out? So.
I like the new Chrome.
Yeah, first meeting. So if I may, I've given you a definition of caliper, and I'm giving you, again, 3 options. It's not that I don't like Susan and Liz's suggestion, but I think we can improve on it just a little bit, so I've offered my go on it. And of course, we can leave it as it is, which is basically, the bottom line here is 12 inches above the ground, so I'm totally open to that as well, so. Thoughts?
Are we running down these definitions, or are we just nitpicking definitions?
I'm sorry?
Are we running down all the definitions, or are we just nitpicking?
No, we're just doing these. That's what I'm saying. We're going to come back at a different meeting, at a later meeting, and address some of these other definitions that we've got.
But some of these definitions are the same name, but are going to have a different definition. That's correct. The caliper appears in the old version.
It's 12 inches above the ground, yeah.
Right, and we get the new version is here. So we're going to pick one of them and just go forward from there.
Okay, well, I'll go first. When I sat down with Liz, we talked about this and came up with option number 2.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else I can say. Okay, and the reason we came up with that is because the ANSI code is designed specifically by professionals that know what they're doing, and every time that there needs to be a change, they update that change. So,
How often is that gonna change?
I have no idea, because I don't know enough about trees to tell you that.
Yeah.
But they do, so, and I believe, you know, you can put a number on there, but, and then every time that they do change it, then you're going to need to
I fixed it.
change this.
No, I think you're right. What we should do is refer to an accepted standard.
Yeah, where did you get ISA standards from versus ANSI standards? Was that a suggestion from Liz, or?
No. That's what I found. I don't know if you recall, but Julie had mentioned that she had a model ordinance, which she passed along to me.
Again, this would be a really good question to ask Liz.
Yeah.
As to
Okay.
which one.
All right. I'm liking it.
Susan, could I ask you, because I've quite frankly always been confused about this issue.
Mhm.
The first is, what does the current ANSI Z60.1 say?
It says whatever it says at the time that code.
No, but what does
is
it say? What are we saying as of this moment?
It's a very long, drawn-out definition of how, in other words, right now we're saying 12 inches above the ground, okay, is where the caliper of the tree is measured. All right, but if the tree is on a sloped piece of property, if it's a big tree, okay, and the ground is sloped, where do you measure from?
Well, the
Okay.
planning commission suggested you measure from the uphill side.
Okay, so again, you can do that, or you can just say, if someone were to come and say, I have a real problem with taking down this 3-foot diameter tree, or with replace, and again, it all goes back to, are you gonna leave in that ridiculous part about if we cut down this tree, we have to replace it with, 20 different measurements based on what you're cutting down. If you're gonna stick with that, then this has to be a very precise measurement, because it could be the difference between somebody putting in 50 trees or somebody putting in, so that's why it only becomes a problem, as you guys know as attorneys, when somebody makes it a problem.
Well, no.
And then
Actually, let me
Liz
explain
needs
my
to be able to
confusion.
cover herself, and the city needs to be able to cover themselves by saying, okay, our code says 12 inches above the ground, but it doesn't reference where the ground is, or I don't know, if a flood comes in and washes away 3 foot of the soil and now the tree's dead. You know what I mean? It just, the ANSI code is very specific on everything, and it's way more information than you would ever put in a city code.
All right, so here are a few of my points. I don't know what the ANSI code says, so I'm not comfortable approving provision that says it should be what the ANSI code says. I need to know what it says, number one.
Okay.
Number two, if I'm a member of the public, do I really want to deal with a highly complicated provision that goes, as you said, on and on and on in great detail, or do I want some clear-cut definition of what caliper is? Number three, I still don't, the reference here, and I'm just looking at this trying to figure out what's the easiest thing for the public to deal with. This here says the diameter of a new nursery tree, but most of the issues, or at least a large number of the issues can you, Ann, turn these down a little? A large issue.
Gene has his hand close to the microphone at that end.
So it's your ring, Gene. Anyway, if this says it's the diameter of a new nursery tree, what about all the old trees? You just referenced the 3-foot caliper tree. Well, is that the same ANSI definition? Because you have there the diameter of a new nursery tree. Let me just keep going. And my last one is, I don't understand when you use diameter at breast height versus caliper. I have always found both the term and the application of diameter at breast height offensive, because it is not objective unless you put in this 4.5 feet above the ground. And I don't know when you use that term versus caliper.
Well, I'll tell you.
Those are my questions.
Okay, you use diameter of breast height when you are measuring a mature tree. You use caliper when you are measuring a tree from a nursery that's coming back in. That's why the two terms, they're different. So one refers to a new tree, one refers to a mature tree. So that's basically what I learned when I was speaking with Liz. So again, for the diameter of a new nursery tree would be met, or the caliper of a new nursery tree as defined in the ANSI code, whereas the height of a mature tree, we went according to the ISA standards. And again, I'm going back, literally, we did this 7 months ago, was when I sat down and we proposed these and had all the notes, and because I have a definition for diameter at breast height as well. So after several hours of research with Liz, this is what we came up with. And again, we don't know. I mean, who here honestly knows? So that's why I'm getting a little frustrated with the fact that we asked experts, this is what they told us. To me, it's no different than with the building code. The building code says you have to have, a house with windows. It doesn't tell you that the window has to be, 36 inches by 48 inches and operable enough to a height of 24 inches so somebody can climb out of it in case of an emergency. That's not something that you would put in the code, but that is the code that the building official has to follow. So with that respect, if it said that you can't have any windows if you're within 5 foot of your neighbor's property for privacy, but the building code says, yeah, you have to have a window because the bedrooms go in there, that's when you're better off referencing the authority having jurisdiction would be the stricter of the two codes. So I believe if you put in an expert's opinion here, it makes it easier as things change and if somebody has a specific problem. So we can dumb it down so the public can read the code and get every answer that they want. But from the perspective of the person that has to enforce the code, they have to be able to say, yes, it's 12 inches above the ground. However, in this strange, unique circumstance that you have, we would have to refer to the ANSI code to get a proper measurement. So it just depends on how much information you want in the city code and how much information you want in the codes that the officials actually use to make decisions with.
I think we need to be consistent. And being consistent means we have to refer to a national or international standard.
I agree.
And the way our building zoning code is written here, we don't have the details. The details take up volumes. There's a volume for single family, there's a volume for multifamily, there's a volume for commercial, there's a volume for everything. That's where you look things up. That is a standard that is nationwide, in some cases earthwise. It's also a standard that is litigated to death, so that if you ever go to court, you don't have to rewrite things. Exactly. It's already done. The only thing I'm familiar with the ANSI code because being an undergraduate engineer, we use that as a reference a lot. The ISA I'm not as familiar with. So we can let
Liz decide whether we should use ANSI or ISA.
No.
It should be something that's set, not something that's variable.
Yeah, no.
And the two codes cover the same thing, I'm pretty sure. We just have to decide which one we're going to use.
And the city can adopt the code, just like they adopt the building code.
Right, and they adopt the building code
So they can adopt, and you can put that as one of your sections. The city hereby adopts ANSI standards for, trees
determining
or whatever.
the caliper.
Okay, and then
we adopt the building code with exceptions.
Right, now the thing is the city will have to join if they haven't already, and they'll have to become a member, or have to pay the membership fee. But the nice thing about being a part of one of these codes is they have people. If you are a member of the organization, you call them and they make the decision. They make the interpretation, and they are basically no different than the building code, there's always a variable, but you can call them and they have a team of experts that say this was the intent of the code and this is our interpretation of it, and they'll put it in writing. So I would think that would save a whole lot of headache for people that, you have a tree commission with people on it that they're not lawyers, and they're not certified arborists, and they're not tree experts. So you do have, if things could be avoided before they get to people that have to say, look, this is just extreme, and we have to come up with a fact on whether or not we're gonna make an exception for this, you know, I think that's probably the safest way to do it. And I understand it is very easy from a standpoint of designing things to be able to go to a code and go, okay, I can read this, it's 12 inches. But with today's technology and being able to go online and look things up, you can also go, okay, what's ANSI say, blah, 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 and then read it.
So if, Susan, if I understand you, because this has significant implications going forward, if we adopt this two-part definition of measuring the diameter of a tree, and one is caliper and one is diameter of breast height, we're going to be changing the code all over the place. No. Excuse me. Because, for example, in the definition of a specimen tree, which gets to the issues of tree removals and tree mitigation and all that, the entire reference is to trees of certain number of inches of caliper.
Yes, you are correct. And we did that because you guys assigned me this section, and this is probably the only section I'm going to be able to talk on because this is the one
So
I did all the research
all that
on.
gets changed.
Basically, I'm suggesting the same thing I suggested 8 months ago when we sat down, that the two definitions, okay, and I even have on the paper that I gave you guys, it says, note, caliber and DBH definitions need to be located and corrected throughout the code.
They're both applicable in specific instances,
right.
And we have to identify that as we go through this. And I think you have to some extent, and I think I have too, on some of these changes that I've made.
Now, to complicate things further, my definition of diameter at breast height uses the ISA standard, okay?
Okay, well, that's...
So, again, deferring to the experts, and I cannot remember back that far exactly, you know, why we chose ANSI for one and ISA for the other. It would be a good question for Liz. I'm sure she could pop it off the top of her head. But, you know, so we're kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't know what to say. So to answer your question,
I'm sympathetic to what Sandy's saying about giving the public information. But by the same token, I'm sympathetic to what Gene's saying about how we're going to prosecute. I'm not prosecute,
we don't want a 1,000-page code.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, the third option or the first option, or I mean, excuse me, the second option would work for me. And just deciding whether we're going to do ANSI or ISA, we can talk to Liz about that when she gets here. And I guess the bottom line is when somebody's addressing these things and they come across this reference that's obtuse, you can't understand what it is. The hope is that either something on the website will help to you know, flesh this out for them, or they're going to call the city hall and speak to the city arborist, and that person's going to tell them 12 inches or whatever the hell it is.
Well, the other analogy that I'd like to make as far as the standard is concerned is, and this is one that most people are aware of, when you hire a builder, if the builder is really up to date about things, he doesn't do things on a contract that's
Right.
just written out, but uses an AIA standard contract. And
Right.
the AIA contract may be 12 pages long, but it refers to standard definitions and specifications that you can refer to, that everybody gets to look at the same thing.
okay, can I
And
give
it's
you?
also adjudicated up to wazoo, so you don't have to worry about precedent.
All right, let me give you an example here. This is 2014 American Standard for Nursery Stock. And a big thing went out on the internet, and it's all over if you look it up, and it basically says, note there's been a change to section ANSI Z60.1, and it's now available for industry use. And I'll summarize this quickly, but give you an idea of why this is something that we can't do. The standard reflects a consensus of the industry regarding how nursery stock living plants other than annuals should be specified and sold within the trade. For instance, it includes how to measure, state the size of a plant, determine the acceptable relationship between the plant and the container or root ball, and describe a plant intended for a particular use. In addition to trees and shrubs, it covers liners and understock plants, perennials, grasses, ground covers, blah, blah, blah. If you buy nursery stock, it is important to provide your supplier with the specifications that are consistent with the standard, or you may not get what you expect. Okay, blah, 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 blah. So basically, they went through and here's the 5 most important revisions to this. And now it's coming back to me a little bit because the ANSI one that we used, again, is for the caliper for new nursery trees. And the caliper, like Liz said, sometimes when you buy a new nursery tree, it's in a pot, and the pot is all filled up, okay? And then when they take it out of the pot to plant it, you no longer have 6 inches of fill above it. So where is the height measured? And this goes on to actually tell you how you have to do that. And it is a 1.5 pages long, so it's not something you're gonna put in the code. So, and I just looked it up, so that's how easy it is for the public to go, okay, here's what it says. All right, so even though a lot of these things have to be subscribed to.
That's a public available
Well,
piece of information?
Years ago when we did it, you go to the library,
Yeah.
and they would have it in the library, and you look it up, just like you guys would for law things, you know? Nowadays, I mean, Liz should have a copy of this. I mean, we can probably walk right in there and get one, I would assume. Now, the ISA standards are different standards. I'm sure we could do the same thing, but, you know, is it all on here? Do you want to pay to subscribe to this? No. But honestly, if you're a landscaper or a builder or an architectural designer, you would have all these codes in your office.
And they'll be able to answer the question when the person asks.
Yeah.
Well, with the building code, the city has them all. And they've got
Right.
copies at the library.
Right.
You
So
can
if
go
I
back
were
and-
thinking about taking a tree down, I would go, okay, and I would come in and go to the, you know, the library here, go in and say, could I see ANSI code, please? And I would read it myself. A lot of people would probably make an appointment and ask Liz to explain it. So, again,
You could also have a handout that's available on the website that gives this kind of
Yep.
information. It's
one-
not part of the regulation,
Right.
but it is
Right.
a useful piece of information.
The one thing I will say is,
Widely built.
I don't think we should refer to 2 standards for the same word. We should adopt one or the other.
I agree.
Well, let me look at.
That's what I was saying.
I can't
before.
remember why the ISA standard, it possibly is because ANSI doesn't have a diameter at breast height definition.
Probably.
Maybe they call it something else.
But I don't know, but let me look it up. But again, if I can look it up that fast on my phone.
All right, well, I'd like to move along. I think we've gotten to a point where we understand what we need to do here, so.
Well, we don't. Are we picking one of those, or
Huh? You mean as to DBH?
are we picking one of those definitions?
Yeah.
So this section is closed and done.
Yeah, I'm happy to go with yours. Right? Is that acceptable to you guys?
It is, so long as we make a recommendation to the commission, if this is what's gonna go there, is that any time there is a reference in the code to standardized material like ANSI or ISA,
Right.
that the city going forward has those references available for the public to access. I don't wanna have it so that people in this town, the only way they can do anything is either hiring a professional and incurring fees, or they have to pay some fee to get access to information. That information should be freely available and not difficult for them to get.
Excellent point.
Yes.
Excellent point. It'll be in the minutes. All right. So how about DBH?
If we're gonna do the differentiating points, I mean, I'm looking at the planning commission said that DBH is basically 4 feet 6 inches above the ground, measured on the uphill side of a tree. And Susan gave us DBH as the diameter of tree measured at 4.5 feet above the ground according to ISA standards. So if ISA standards tell you which way to measure it, like if it's on a hill or something, then, you know, I think we're fine. And if that's the differentiating point, I mean, the city has not complied, I mean, has never differentiated between the two. And it's put people through enormous hardship because of that.
So we can put that in there.
DPH is not in the definition section of the current code.
That's what I said. They haven't differentiated, my point was, between the standardized measurement of a mature tree and the standardized measurement of a nursery new tree. So my point earlier was, when you get into all these issues about tree removal, tree protection, definitions of certain types of trees, mitigation, where they were all referring to caliper, which referred back to the height at 12 inches, that's a very different thing than the diameter at 4.5 feet, because any tree is going to go like this. It's going to be broader at the base, and then it's going to go up a little bit. So if you're measuring a mature tree at 12 inches above the ground, it's going to have a different diameter than a tree at 4.5 feet. It's going to be smaller at 4.5 feet. So as long as we're clear that that's what we're doing, and if I don't care if we use a different standard, quite frankly, especially if ANSI doesn't have a standard for diameter of breast height. But again, my same point, I would want this standardized material available to the public through the city, so that we're not creating another burden to the public.
I agree.
Why did you cross out mature?
So thank you for asking. I eliminated that because I can see where there's situations where, you know, somebody's going to come in and file a permit, apply for a permit, and it may be affecting a tree that's only 3 weeks old. It's only been in the ground a couple of weeks. Why do we have to? What is the importance of identifying it as mature?
One is
the
planted
real
and
question
one's
is
not.
you're measuring it at 4.5 feet.
Yeah, one is planted and one is not.
One is planted and one is not?
Caliper is a new nursery tree that hasn't gone in the ground yet. Diameter breast height is a tree that's planted in the ground.
Okay.
So
but I guess my point is, let me start again. You're coming in, you want to remove a tree, okay?
right,
That tree's only been in there 2 weeks. You want to take it out.
it's planted, so then you use diameter
Right.
breast height.
Right, but it's only, the tree's only 6 months old. That's not a mature tree, that's all I'm saying. Why do we need the term mature to identify how we're gonna take a measurement?
I don't know, but again, I'm telling you, this is not something
We can ask
that
Liz, she's coming.
the four of us can determine.
Okay. All right.
It's just not.
But also, when you're talking about mature versus a nursery tree could be a 50-foot high tree.
Yeah,
No,
it's
honest
true.
to God. I've seen people do that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not new. It's old. And it may cost you $100,000 to put it in, but,
In DC, in the DC area, they move trees like that.
oh yes, all the time.
And when I came here, there was a red maple tree right in the footprint of my house. And the first thing I thought of was, well, maybe we can move it. Maybe I can find somebody that'll buy this thing and move it, you know. Forget that.
No,
Done
I've
that
watched
already.
some of this big machinery that just reaches down and picks it up and
Yeah, no, I know.
attaches the ball to it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. So we can ask Liz what her thought is on that too.
It is interesting that Planning Commission also did not have the word mature in it. But I don't have their explanation with me.
We can ask Liz about that. Okay, so public tree. What I'm trying to do here is set up. What's going on? A distinct. I'm going to be talking about public trees and private trees as we go down the road here. So I'm setting this up as a public tree rather than as a park tree, and a street tree as a further definition of a public tree. So I'm looking for your thoughts on that.
Does that mean all other trees are private trees?
I'm sorry?
Does that mean all other trees are private trees?
Good question. If it's not in the public, it's a private tree. I have not addressed the issue of a tree. I have an opinion about a shade tree. That's like a mature tree. As far as I'm concerned,
I noted that they need to change the definitions of street trees and park trees to differentiate between public and private trees, because it's very confusing throughout the entire code. When you call it a street tree versus a park tree.
yeah, I'm eliminating the concept of a park tree. I would propose that anywhere in the ordinance that you see the term park tree, it's a public tree.
So basically, there's public trees and private trees, and then there are trees that are on public property that are treated privately, and those are the street trees, as the current code stands, which is why it's so confusing. Okay, so the trees between, that are planted not on your property, on the city property, but where your driveway is, okay? The boundary is.
Yeah.
That's very confusing, and that's what the street tree definition is.
I'm in agreement.
So basically, those are privately maintained public trees.
Not necessarily.
So,
It's subject to, other provisions throughout the ordinance.
right.
It's a tree that may have been planted by the property owner adjacent to that street.
Right.
And the city has a role that it's playing.
You have public trees, private trees, and shared trees.
Shared?
I don't know if that's the right word, but that's what it is. It's a tree that really doesn't belong, it belongs to both people or is maintained by both people. And that's.
Can somebody explain to me? I really don't get this street tree notion. I never have. Give me an example. I mean, you have a residential lot. The
Right.
lot runs right up to the street.
No.
Yeah, there's an easement or right of way, but
Right.
Your property line runs right up to the street.
But that's in the setback.
Yeah.
Well, you probably
That's
don't run
on
up to the sidewalk.
setback.
Does it run right up to the street?
Not
May.
necessarily.
I
Could just run up the sidewalk.
on Lake Drive, you don't have a sidewalk.
Yes, we do.
Paralleling the street?
I was under the impression
Oh,
it was
excuse me.
not
Well, it's
on
that area
private.
between your sidewalk and the
Yeah.
street.
There is no area between the sidewalk and the street. The sidewalk's right next to it.
I was under the
Oh,
impression
okay.
that the street
It's a
trees
very
are
small
only in
tree.
areas where, are there areas where the trees, the properties don't run to the street and there's trees in front of people's houses? That is public.
I just think somebody ought to explain this to us, because I honestly don't get it.
That's how it was explained it to me. Was that there was an area, there were trees that,
I've destroyed your packet. Don't try to find what your stuff is. I put it all over the place. Here's this drawing you just gave us, Hoyte, today. It's another matter.
Yeah.
But you can see that this property runs right up to the street.
Okay.
So I don't understand where a street tree would go. I don't understand. You mean, so maybe you're saying to me that there are places in the city of Rehoboth Beach where you have a sidewalk, the residential property has terminated, and there is some property that goes from the sidewalk to the street?
Yes.
that was my,
That
yes,
is
All over
public
Country
property?
Club
I think that's what the definition says.
Everything in up Country Club Estates is that way.
yes.
Oh, okay,
I
well,
think
that's what I didn't
that's what a
understand.
street
That's what the definition says. It's
No,
the
no,
land
I'm just
between.
trying to- I just said, I don't know what it, all right, so now you're
Yeah.
telling me, so there are places, and he's saying Country Club Estates,
Yeah.
where you have sidewalks, and then you have another piece of property between the sidewalk and the street, and that
Yes.
is
Yes.
public property.
Yes.
Yes.
I see.
Is that correct?
that's
my
where-
Yes.
interpretation.
Yes.
Okay.
Got it.
Yes.
So then
Okay,
that's the
now I
problem.
understand what we're
And
talking
when you
about.
go through
Okay.
the code, it starts addressing who can plant them, and if you plant them, who takes care of them, and who can take them down, and who can't touch them. So basically,
Got it.
what it boils down to is who's gonna pay the bill when it comes time to do something to the tree.
Or the
that's when it
side, or the
becomes a problem.
sidewalk, because the tree
Exactly.
is, because the tree is cracked the
Exactly.
sidewalk.
So the city says you can't cut the trees down, but if the tree needs to be diseased or taken down or trimmed,
Or it's
the
buckled in the
homeowner has to pay
sidewalk.
for it. So that needs, and street trees is the name that they have for it, which,
No, I understand. So Gene, explain this to me, because you for every person that owns a residential lot and they have a sidewalk on their property, the maintenance of the sidewalk is that private property owner's responsibility, as I remember.
We're in Rehoboth.
I'm asking about Rehoboth.
In Rehoboth, typically speaking, if the sidewalk is generally on public property, but by charter, it's required to be maintained by the property owner.
Right. So what we're really talking about here is for these areas that I've now just learned about, where there are trees called street trees.
mm-hmm.
Should we just say, if it's on public property, it's a public tree, and it's the city's responsibility?
But as Susan is suggesting, sometimes that responsibility is shared. And there's
Well,
language
that's
in
because
other
the
provisions that
Well,
identify how that responsibility should be carried
It's
out.
all throughout the code. So
Yeah.
you almost literally, and this is why when we started in the very beginning by moving sections around, I mean, you really need to start, with ABC and go, what are we dealing with here? What's our tree code? Okay, maybe you need Article 1, private trees. Article 2, public trees. Article 3, street trees. And then put your definitions down and, or start with trees. These are all our definitions. Now we're going to go over and we're going to say public. I don't need to read that. I'm a private homeowner. I don't care about public trees. I'm not dealing with my street trees like that. This is where I need to read. I mean, to me, if you were going to make a code simple and easy to read, that's where it would be.
Yeah.
And I would put my definitions, and then I would address at the bottom, applicable codes. These are the codes that are going to be referenced in here, and this is where you find them. But again, that's rewriting the entire code, and we haven't even figured out.
That's what we're doing.
Okay, so.
But if that's something that holds some logic for the rest of you, I'm good with that. I'm open to it. My thought is you have a definition sections and you have all the definitions right there. But if as currently exists, you have a couple definitions in Article 1 and a couple definitions in Article 3 and so on and so forth. If it works and people understand it, I'm fine with that too.
Like the Parks and Shade Commission, do they regulate what goes on private property? Or just in parks? If you have a hearing for either one, you go to Parks and Shade Commission for everything, right?
Yes.
Residential, okay. So, that would be something that would be addressed in each section, and maybe Parks and Shade Commission is, the wrong name. Maybe it's just the Tree Commission.
Right.
So you don't have to differentiate that.
Right.
Either way, it's a lot of reorganizing, a lot of time, and you've done a phenomenal job doing it.
Yeah.
This is certainly, when we originally started this, we said, let's change a couple things that are going to make life easier for everybody in general.
Wasn't that way, was it?
No, it hasn't gotten there because I think it's just too overwhelming and too big a project for 4 people that have.
That's why we need another person. Oh, I can't.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready? Where are we on DBH? Excuse me, on public trees and street trees. God, get me off DBH. Yeah.
Could it be public trees as you have it,
Mm-hmm.
private trees as you have it, which are on private land,
Okay.
and then street trees being shared responsibility?
Yeah.
Yep.
Because,
So that's the way it works now.
yeah, because those aren't technically public trees. They are on city property, but with shared responsibility. I mean, it's just like the sidewalks. What's in the charter now is that sidewalk is in city property.
Okay.
However, and your property lines run up to the sidewalk. And so the way it is now, if the sidewalk breaks, you have to fix it. If the curb breaks, which is right there by the street, technically you have to fix it. And that little piece of grass in between is a shared responsibility. And, you know, people don't always get permission to plant trees there, but they plant trees. And once they plant trees there, it's their responsibility. If the city were to plant trees there, there's some kind of a communication that it's either the city's gonna manage that responsibility or you, the property owner. I'm gonna put the tree in, but you're gonna manage it, something like that. So maybe the street trees is just more shared responsibility trees.
That is something that came up, I guess, a year or two ago when a bunch of trees were, the city planted a bunch of trees in country club estates. The city planted them on that no man's land that's in between. And I think the people that were there expected that the city's gonna maintain them. But in the same block, there could be a tree that was planted by a homeowner 20 years ago in the no man's land, and that should be the responsibility of the homeowner because they planted it. But
Is that a street tree as we've been discussing here, the example you're giving?
they're both street trees.
Okay, okay.
But one's, basically, they're the responsibility of who planted it.
So the definition already contains the definitions section, point 253.24 contains a definition for trees or tree. And that could be amended to identify it as a private tree. It's basically just saying it's a woody, whatever vegetation kind of thing. It's very general.
Is street tree defined right now in our code?
Yes, it is. It's the current 253.1. You have a definition for park tree and
I don't mean
street tree.
I meant public, what was your other one?
Public.
Public tree.
I'm replacing park tree with public tree.
I see, got it, okay.
So there's other situations, and I hate to bring this up because we're already over an hour into this thing. We're only on number 4. But there are, and I think you're a good example of that, Sandy. There are properties, Henlopen Avenue. There are no sidewalks on Henlopen Avenue. And there are trees that are probably in that public zone, that setback area, that might be contentious. And I don't know if we need to address that, but I'm just pointing it out. You know, it's a possible concern.
I think they are contentious because there's no sidewalk there. Most people think that those trees are theirs when you go over to the city property. But they're not really willing to take care of the trees. But when the city starts cutting those trees, it gets contentious, like, oh, you're cutting my tree. Well, no, it's not your tree. And so
it's a public tree. It's a public tree.
But I don't think any of those
That's right.
are shared responsibility trees.
Patty doesn't have a sidewalk either.
Yeah, but I think again, up to the property lines are private trees. And after the property line are technically either shared responsibility trees or city trees. And I think when there's no sidewalk, I think it's really probably the public trees.
So what if,
not on parkland.
what if we have trees, whatever you want to call it, okay? Right now there's Article 1 and Article 2, which took me a while to figure out that one is public and one is private, correct?
Yeah, but
Okay,
I'm
so,
not buying that.
and then the street trees are just kind of thrown in there. So what if you just have, you know, code section trees or whatever you want to call it? In there, you list all the pertinent information that doesn't change, okay? You list the commission, how you come about the commission, the operations of the commission. You list the arborist, okay? Who the arborist, you know, what the arborist is, what their responsibilities are. You list the, you know, however you're gonna, you know, whatever else is in there as far as you have to go and, you know, go to the, when you go to the commission if there's a problem. So you list all that stuff. You list all the definitions, all right? you can put the species in that category because that does not change. All right, and that becomes your tree article. And then you branch off to public trees,
Branch off, okay.
private trees, I get it, no pun intended. Public trees, private trees, street trees, okay? And specifically list under those
As a distinct article.
as a, yeah, you know,
Okay.
okay, and
All right.
list. And then you have your definitions. The definitions aren't going to change no matter what kind of tree it is. The way you measure it shouldn't change. The only thing that's really changing in those is the public trees have certain things that the city code wants to say that we're going to protect the parks and this and this and this. The private trees is where you come into the areas of what can I do with my property. And then the street trees is a whole nother animal that obviously could possibly need to be broken down into different segments of my property goes to the sidewalk, my property doesn't go to the sidewalk, my property is whatever you guys were just talking about, you know, different. And it's divided up equally that way. But in general, instead of trying to figure out where everything goes right now, we need to say, all right, so the first thing we're going to do is what you've already done, Hoyte. You've looked at the creation of the commission and you said, we're not going to change this, we're not going to change this. This all goes here. Because those things don't seem to be a problem. I mean, okay. And we could lay everything out in an outline form and then just leave blank spots where this is what we need. These are the definitions. And this becomes a very good job for Sandy's crew, okay? Once we get that far, they could go through and help us break this down into sections. I mean, I think, Sandy, would that not be a very good job for law students to do something like that?
That's what I proposed about 8 months ago.
I know, exactly. So
but
all we need to do...
I was turned down.
What we need to do,
we're not done.
Okay.
That's
what we need to do
table.
is basically come up with an outline, okay? Fill in the blank, all right? These things in black, nobody's having any problem with. This is all good to go. These things in red, and this is kind of what you did here. Mm-hmm. I think because it all got mixed around a little bit, it's kind of confusing. I think we almost need, and I know you're looking at me going, why don't you just do this? Because it sounds like something like that. And the outline part is simple. It's no different than writing a school paper. Get the outline part done. Get the things we know are good, that we don't have a problem with, that haven't caused any problems. And I think you're going to find that, you know, we're mincing words over a lot of this other stuff. Like, I think the tree part, the actual main section of trees, is pretty good and is in there. You know, term of office and what the commissioners is. It might need a new name, you know, and then what the arborist, that was one of my things, you know, what's the arborist's job description? What is that? The definitions would all be listed, and then we can branch out and go, okay, now how do we move these into other sections?
So basically we need sort of a tree that starts at the top like a family tree with just the word tree.
Exactly.
And then it branches out into different
Exactly.
different
and then
trees.
It branches down and it, you know, but the trunk of the tree is not an issue. You know, there's a few things in there, and I think everywhere, if we just took everywhere we're using the current definition, you'd have half that trunk built. Okay?
Well,
the stuff that you're not changing.
Not quite, but I'm buying your package. You keep going.
So if, you know, I mean, I love computers, but I'm a huge fan of pieces of paper where you just basically print out, this is caliper, okay? We got this, and we just take them and we get them all laid out, and then we start filling in the blanks. And that's kind of where we started 9 months ago. We started doing that, and we said, okay, everybody's going to do this one thing.
Well, I think if we get a couple more pages into this thing, we could skip over. I'm happy to do that as well. I think we've got some pretty substantial proposals that are available for discussion here this morning.
I think we need to take the tree definition thing that we just talked about and set it aside so we
clearly
can get some.
Yeah, I put these 4 or 5 items up here because they were relevant in what we've already addressed, the structure of Article 1 as it originally existed. And for example, the next item that I'm going to take up, if we go this way, I altered language in the specific provision, wherever the hell it is, about topping. Tree topping is my 253.14, and it was formerly 253.13. But it just begged for a specific definition in the definition section. They were defining the provision, defining the issue in the provision that, you know, set forth the requirements about topping a tree.
What do you mean by topping a tree?
Yeah, go. Your name, please.
My name's Patty Brown. I live on State Road, First State Road, the corner where all the trees are. What do you mean by topping a tree?
Question. I'll read it to you. It is the severe cutting back of limbs or stubs larger than 3 inches in diameter within the tree's crown to such a degree so as to remove the normal canopy and disfigure the tree. That is the definition. Okay.
What Delmarva Power does.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
What
I'm going to give you another example.
What happens when our creator decides to take the tree down and to trim the limbs off? Because that's what has happened to me this year.
Mm-hmm.
The limb got bad. It was just hanging. And it was hanging where it would have fell on my house if I hadn't did something the other day.
Right.
I had got my pruning thing, and I had to turn the limb, and it came down. It almost got me, but it didn't. But it's laying in my front yard. You're welcome to go see it. And I have trimmed it since, but, you know, but what do you do when the limbs need to come down and you've got electrical wires all around your corner? And I mean, I know that's a safety hazard, and I know I'm guessing that the radiation probably kills the limbs and stuff that's on the top where those wires are. What do you do about that?
I'm going to answer your question. I think there's actually 2 different issues that you've raised. The first, as it relates to the utility companies, and I'm not sure how this works, but I think if you as a property owner or you as, you know, somebody that's in the neighborhood, if you will, that feels your electrical or telephone, whatever wires that are utility wires that are in play are going to be jeopardized by the limbs in the growth of the tree, then either you notify the city or you notify the utility company, and they make arrangements to come out and trim that. Now, to the extent that it's not something like that, then I think it's your responsibility. You know, if there's not a wire or whatever that's being involved, but if there's a provision in the existing ordinance that provides that if you have a tree that's overhanging, again, it's a question of public safety. So if somebody's walking by your property and the tree is overhanging, you may be, you know, required by the city to do something about that.
And I've got one more question
about
the boundary trees. Like
boundary trees, yeah.
I have a tree on Grove Street. It's in the backyard, but part of it is on the property where the townhouses are. The roof, I guess the roof, is that still my responsibility? If that tree needs to come down, then I need to take that one down?
That is a shared responsibility. It's kind of what we were talking about before.
But the tree is so big, it's one of those big grandmother trees, and it looks like it's on my property, but the way they put the fence up, and Mr. Roop and Mr. Hill told me that they always backed it up, the fence back on their property, so the fence is behind where that boundary is, so that is still theirs.
I'm not quite sure how to address your question.
The fence isn't necessarily the border.
That's right.
You may have to have a surveyor actually tell you where it is, because frankly, the property line may go right to the middle of the tree.
Well, I mean, I don't want to take the trees down, but things get old and things die.
Yeah.
And
well, that's taken
we learned that from California, where, you know, nature will take care of it and take it down if we don't.
Yeah, we've got section 253-13 in the old ordinance, or in the new ordinance.
Could you get paper on that microphone?
The, that comes under the maintenance, which is in two
Right,
dash
maintenance, yeah.
13, which I think takes care of that.
So I had a conversation, I'm digressing a little bit, but I had a conversation with somebody a week or so ago about it. I'm going to make a public admission that it looks like I have topped a tree, okay? Without realizing it, I have a crepe myrtle in my backyard. And I don't do it every year, but every so often I will top that tree because the way that a crepe myrtle grows is, you know, it throws out new branches every season.
It's more like
okay?
a bush than a tree.
And that's because it falls somewhere in there between a bush and a tree. So, but I didn't think of it that way. I guess I thought I was trimming my bush rather than my tree, you know. But as this provision provides, that some of these trunk limbs are more than 3 inches. So. All right, where are we going here, guys? So we're going to come back maybe to further discuss with Liz some of the part about what constitutes a public tree, a street tree, a tree itself, or maybe a private tree. Huh? We good with that? How about topping? Do you understand what I was trying to explain before about why I moved a certain portion of that language into the definition section?
Yeah, that's a good place for it. Because it involves, it's saying whether it's a public tree or a private tree or street tree or park tree or whatever. So it should be in the generic section.
Okay.
But where did you get this?
Definition? The definition is actually, I extracted that language, that very sentence or sentences, right out of whatever it was before. Did I say 13? I forget what it was.
It should be 13.
It's 253.13. So if you look at the original language, you will see that definition contained in the provision itself.
Did you consider the language that was proposed by the Planning Commission?
No, I don't think I did, no.
Planning Commission says that topping is to trim a tree to prevent the natural upward growth of a tree significantly altering its natural shape.
Okay.
So what?
No, it's much simpler.
Yeah,
But that
I'll
seems
buy
to be
that.
the definition of a utility power. Got more of a power coming in and doing exactly the same thing. Except they don't usually care whether they kill the tree or not.
I mean, this
Is
very
that from the Planning Commission's?
markup. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm open to making that change.
I mean, yours is in some ways more specific.
Right.
It does contain some language that I think will subject it to, I guess, opinion debate. What is severe cutting? So in other words, you can cut back limbs so long as it's not severe cutting back of limbs. You know, what is the normal canopy versus just, you know, the natural upward growth of a tree, significantly altering its shape, natural shape. I don't know what natural shape of a tree is.
I hate to tiptoe into this, but there may well be ANSI standards, or maybe there's an ISA, you know, some ISA language about that too. So that's something we might want to explore.
I think that's a good point on the ANSI, but if they have a definition of topping, and we think that that's an important provision to have in the tree code.
That's what I'm saying. All right. All right, onward and upward. So without trying to identify where this next item on my paper here would fit, let's address the duties and responsibilities of the city arborists. And again, what I've attempted to do here, well, what I'm doing is responsive to the conversations that I've had with both the city manager and the city arborist about how these duties should be described and how the functions should be outlined. And so that's what's reflected here. I think it also, I mean, again, talk about issues that we brought up 8 months ago. We decided very early on that we wanted to move responsibilities away from the Parks and Shade Tree Commission to the city arborist, and that's kind of what's reflected here. Some of this language is taken away from the Parks and Shade Tree Commission provision and to this newly created language about the city arborist. So does anybody have some thoughts about that?
I have two things I would bring up.
Okay.
The way, in general, I like this.
Are you up in A and B or?
A and B.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at both right now.
Okay.
I have no problems actually with B.
With B?
With B, no
Okay.
problems.
Right.
With A, I just want to point out that the way it is written would mean that the city arborist could never be someone who is not an employee of the city, but has been engaged contractually.
Okay.
We have had
Sure.
an arborist in the past who was not an employee, but was retained on some contractual basis.
Right.
So that's that.
And that's a practice in some other communities too.
All right, so that.
How would you change that? I mean, open the door for that. How would you, can you give me some
I
language?
actually saw, I think in the planning commission.
Oh, okay.
If I can refine that, hold on a
all right.
second. 1 minute, I actually looked at that.
Wait, could you move that?
Oh,
up
I'm
so
sorry.
B
Yeah,
can be
yeah.
seen? Thank you.
And by the way, at the 2-hour mark, we're going to serve banana daiquiris just so we can keep going here. So.
Thank you.
I know you guys already skipped over this because I'm a little slow here looking things up, but there is a definition for topping in the ANSI code,
There you go.
okay? So there's pretty much a definition for everything we're discussing in the ANSI code. So again, I go back to saying that we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel on these, and if you want to put a definition in,
Right.
take it out of the code and put it right in.
Can you give me a reference to whatever it is you're identifying?
Yeah, I'm trying to cheat around it because can we get the copy of the ANSI code from the office? Can we go in the building department and get it? Can I
Well,
do
she
that?
should be here any minute now, so.
They're.
I know they're closed, but I just saw Dom in there today. I mean, can we get the?
They're closed?
They're redoing a database, but, I mean, if we had the code,
They're
the actual code here, I wouldn't have to look it up each time.
They're in 3-day training.
Are you kidding me? Isn't Liz here?
She's here, she'll be over.
Oh, okay.
Here, Hoyte,
Uh-huh.
in the definition that the planning commission had, it says an employee of the city or an individual retained by the city on a contractual
There you go.
basis.
Okay. Or.
An individual retained by the city on a contractual basis.
All right.
So that was point number one.
Yeah,
Point number two.
hang on.
Okay.
On a contractual basis. Okay, number 2.
In terms of qualifications,
Yeah, you sent me something on it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't, in the very last part there, it says, or successfully achieves, has the ability to achieve such certification in 1 year. I think that this person either comes in as a certified arborist or becomes one in a year. I don't think there's a question of capacity here.
Yeah.
I think that for the credibility of the city, as well as the credibility of the city arborist, we need a city arborist who is certified as an arborist.
Well, I think they could also be licensed as a landscape architect.
Licensed as,
As a landscape architect,
uh-huh.
which requires a professional license.
I don't know what that entails, so.
Well, so, did you send me, I think you may have sent me some specific language on that particular issue. But I'm open to whatever you want to tell me now. But the point I want to make is that that is a description, and I'm not saying she wouldn't be open to amending it, but that is a description that the city manager had me put in here. So.
What happened to the definition I gave you?
5 years is better than 2 also.
What happened to the definition?
The definition I gave you before.
Certified arborist recognized by the International Society here. Gee, this is what, can you read that? That's what the planning commission.
Here's what I
Yeah,
had.
so
I don't know what happened to it,
yeah,
but it's the one that.
what happened to it was I went into a meeting with Liz and Sharon Lynn, and this is what came out of that meeting.
Okay.
Now, if I
The
can.
difference between that and landscape architect is landscape architecture.
Send me a link to
Certification
this
requires
place.
a state
and
professional
I'm
license.
you're going to give me the
I can't
reference.
get in it because
Not
I'm not
a
a member of it, so
private
I'm
society
actually
like
picking
this is.
bits and pieces of it off of
An architect
what people have written,
that's
so I
Well,
can't.
educated
that's
in
fine.
That's why it's
All
taking
right,
me
well,
so long.
what was the
So what is
ANSI?
it
Do you have an
called?
ANSI reference to it though?
landscape architecture.
Yeah.
To the topping definition?
Yeah, I'm still reading. Again, if we just could get, Liz, perfect. You have a copy of the ANSI code do you have a copy of the ANSI code in your office?
Which,
So
I
a
mean,
licensed
tree-
landscape
this.
architecture.
Yeah.
I have some of them, but
Right,
not
yes.
all of them.
That's
Because they're,
state
you have to
licensed.
purchase
They're state
most of them.
licensed or
Yes,
just-
it is.
Do you have the
So I
ones
mean,
that have
should
the
I say state
definitions
licensed or
of,
just
in them, caliper and
District
PBH
license is
and
fine
tree
because
topping and all that?
State's the only people that license them.
Those would be in different ones. I would have to look. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But those are pretty
But
simple
we can go back.
definitions.
We can go back to her for that.
Yeah, those aren't difficult. I mean, I can
license
just
the same
find
way
them
that-
right now.
We're gonna ask you some questions about it. But do you have a specific reference, ANSI reference there that you can tell me, like 60.1, like you did with that
No,
other thing?
like I said, because I'm.
Oh, you don't.
I
Okay.
don't
All right.
have,
Okay.
I
Okay.
can't get in
Okay.
the actual code. I'm pulling up
All right.
bits and pieces of it that other people have
All right.
referenced.
All right.
So just real quick, well, now that she's here, what was the
Yeah.
definition?
So, well, let's get to a juncture where we can
Well,
take
can I
advantage
finish
of her
my
being here.
comment?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting
All
at.
right, so the first point I talked to you about was contractual engagement.
Right.
With the help of counsel to my right.
Okay.
I now think that the proper way to put that piece on the end is a certified arborist recognized by the International Society of Arboriculture.
Whoa.
Or, no, that's all there.
Yeah.
Or a licensed landscape architect.
Okay. Successfully is where we change.
Yeah, before successfully.
Yeah.
Insert,
In between.
insert after the word or.
Yeah.
A licensed landscape architect. And then you have comma, or successfully achieves, delete,
Okay.
has the ability to achieve,
All right.
successfully achieves or obtains such
Yes.
certification or license within 1 year.
Okay.
That's a good thing.
You want to take that out?
They should have it or not.
Have it or not, so just have it. So we're gonna cut after architect.
As such a certification.
Period. Either they have they're certified arborists or they're a licensed landscape architect.
Successfully
period.
forward goes out. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We don't need landscape architect in there because anybody who's a licensed landscape architect would be able to achieve their ISA certification. So it's
But
just
not vice versa.
I'm not sure what it would take to be a licensed landscape architect, but
Same thing as in architecture.
then
Exams,
probably
exams, a 5-year degree usually, and exams that are offered by the state, not by a private organization.
yeah, then probably not. But to do the job I'm doing, you have to be trained in arboriculture because we're evaluating tree risk. So that would be more relevant to this code than landscape architect. Yeah. I mean, generally they would have a landscape architect, if you talk to anybody who is a landscape architect, and I have several friends that are both ISA and ASLA, and they chose to go into arboriculture because as a landscape architect, you basically sit behind a computer and design things, put things on CAD. And they want to be out in the real world.
Well, but that's fine, but we're trying to talk about the qualifications for the position of city arborist.
Yeah, and a city arborist can't be a landscape architect. You have to either be an arborist or be able to be one. So if a landscape, like I said, anybody who's worked in landscaping if you have a college degree and you have 3 years experience, then you can take the test and get your ISA, as long as you pass, get your ISA certification.
And the whole thing that we started a long time ago was that we were going to give a lot more authority to the city arborist.
Yes.
Okay, so why are we going to allow someone to do work for a year who's not certified?
We're not.
Yeah, we are. That's
We just scratched that.
okay. So this is the definition that
Okay,
we
we
wrote
changed.
10 months ago. A city employee who is responsible for permitting, inspection, and enforcement of Chapter 253 trees of the municipal code. Such person must have at least 2 years' experience in arboriculture, forestry, horticulture, landscape architecture, or a related field, and shall be a certified arborist recognized by the International Society of Arboriculture, period.
Yeah, and then when we met with the city manager, she felt it was very important to have the ability to attain it so that if somebody was when I first started working for a city in New York, I didn't have my ISA license.
Right.
So I was able to attain it while I was there.
I'm sorry, where you were?
When I first started working for the city of New York, I did not have my ISA
When
certification.
you worked at the city of New York, were you the sole person carrying out that function?
No,
No, and
thankfully.
see, that's why I think it's so
Exactly.
important here.
It's very important
We
here.
are totally dependent on a single individual unless this town really grows dramatically and we hire a second person.
And like you said,
So I want someone who is in this position, who already has the certification, not has the ability to do it, or will get it in a year. They've got to have it. And I think the discussion we're having right now is whether 2 years is sufficient experience or whether it should be longer than that.
2 years is probably sufficient. My personal opinion, 2 years is sufficient, and the certification.
So,
Well,
I'm good with that, Sandy.
no,
And I think we
like
put
what
that-
Susan just read.
Yeah,
I know.
I'm good with that. And I think we put that down as our proposed amendment. And the Board of Commissioners and the city manager can duke it out.
well, on that definition, because to be a certified arborist, you would have to have, for average, if you had a 4-year degree, you would have to have 3 years in the field experience. So the 2-year experience becomes a moot point.
Okay.
But that's okay, but from a code point of view, I think that we would want comfort in saying that the city only has authority to hire someone who's been doing this for 2 years, that's all.
And then the other note that came after discussion was, in order to assign the duties, which we're trying to do right now, you have to rewrite the duties of the Parks and Shade Commission, because the duties of the arborist are the duties of the Parks and Shade Commission in a lot of aspects.
I've done that.
Okay, so
Can I just,
I've done that.
this is the thing that was sent around that I.
So I'm ready to go back. Liz, first of all, thank you for coming. I appreciate your
Did I show up
time.
at a good
I thought you
time?
were changing this
Huh?
to this.
Good time?
Excellent time.
Okay.
So we actually identified a couple issues on this paper that nobody has seen.
this was the old one, and this is the new one.
So you took out the contractual
I
engagement?
took out all that stuff, only because I don't know even what it means. You might need it in there as an
Oh, okay.
attorney, but yeah. So the one I gave you showed the existing definition and the proposed definition. And then I guess you guys changed it when you met with Sharon,
Sharon.
which is fine. But again, I would be opposed to not having someone come in for a year, the damage that could be done in a year, because somebody hasn't got the certification, when we're going to be addressing standards from the ISA. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like having a driving instructor who hasn't passed the driving test. If they're going to be enforcing ISA standards, they should be certified in ISA.
So I think you just take what Hoyte has here, delete starting at or successfully achieves, and I would suggest that unless we never want to allow the city to have someone engaged on a contractual basis, that we add that phrase in. So that you could take what you have up there, Hoyte, where'd it go now?
I moved it.
Yeah,
'Cause I knew you were talking about it.
Moving target.
you're driving us nuts, Hoyte.
I'm getting pretty good.
I think if you have what you have there in the first 3.5 lines, but you stop after Society of Arboriculture, that's basically what Susan had sent to us, right? You double checking me, Susan?
Okay.
After her, meetings, and I would just add a city employee, and after the word city employee, I would just add or an individual retained by the city on a contractual basis, because the city has had experiences in the past where they've not had employees be arborists. They actually had someone on a contractual basis do it. We might have a gap of time in between city arborists where we have to retain somebody who otherwise has the qualifications to come in until we find a permanent employee. And I wouldn't want that person not to be able to take on all of the functions of city arborists just because we didn't anticipate contractual engagement in the first part.
So, I mean, are you amending or altering the language you just gave me?
I'm taking what you have there.
Yeah.
I'm stopping after arboriculture, if I pronounce that correctly. And I'm inserting after employee the phrase or an individual retained by the city on a contractual basis.
Okay. Yeah. So that didn't change.
Right.
Okay.
Well, you don't have that.
No, we don't have that in there, so it did change.
That changes what you have up there.
I have handwritten it on my
So
paper,
therefore
and I
it's
will
already
submit
in
it.
there. We just, the magic board hasn't shown his handwriting.
There we go. All right. Gotcha.
Because I see, Susan, I captured your stuff.
Can we have the banana daiquiris now?
But I didn't waste the time.
Oh, I have all of it.
All right, I'm going back up. So, Liz, there are a couple of,
And as I said, just to finish my comments, I have no problem with the functions you have listed there. Because you've got that whole urban forestry
Did we just
plan.
write one definition, guaranteed for sure done? I think we did. I think you should send it to somebody.
But it's not a definition, that's an actual section.
yeah. Did I send you a copy of this, Liz?
Yeah, you sent me copies.
Okay.
I think of everything.
Okay.
Everything you sent Ann, I got.
Okay. She did not get this.
Oh.
So I'm not so sure you
let's
did.
do it.
Well, anyway, earlier we spoke about the use of the term ISA and ANSI standards as it relates in our definitions for caliper and I guess it didn't come up in DBH, but it could. And so I guess the question for you is, we're making a specific reference to, I think, option 2 under caliper that I think we've decided to adopt that. And so the question is, maybe give us a little brief description or explanation of the difference between ANSI standards and ISA standards and how they might apply here.
For the definition of caliper?
Or just generally, maybe just give us a overview of the two different organizations and their functions.
So ANSI sets, the American National Standards Institute sets standards for all types of different industries.
Beyond.
For
right.
everything.
Yeah.
Mainly safety, like for the tree work specifically, it'd be safety issues, which is the Z60, but and ISA is based a lot off of ANSI. So for like the diameter of a new nursery tree, I mean, you could say based off of ANSI, or you could just say what it is, which is measured at 6 inches above the ground, and when when it exceeds 4 inches, it's measured at 12 inches above ground. Because I don't think in this case writing that on there is clear enough.
Right, and that's kind of the decision we've come to, that we're going to go with that option 2 without specifying a number of inches.
Yeah, I think that's a big mistake, because
That's what you told me to do when we met in the meeting.
So how is your average person going to be able to look in the code and say, what is ANSI Z60.1, and then have to go and reference it? If something can be said in a few words.
Thank you, Liz. You heard exactly what I said about a half hour ago.
So, but here's the difference. If it can be said in a few words, it should be said. If we're saying all planting must be in accordance with ANSI and ISA standards, well, we can't illuminate all that in this. So that would make sense that we would just reference it in that case.
Okay, now Liz.
And how specific do you want to get? Do you want to say 12 inches or 6 inches or?
Well, whatever we decide to, I mean, because right now everything is just measured at 12. We could stay measuring everything at 12.
Which is what it says right now.
Yeah, we would just have to clarify a couple of the definitions, because I think but it doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Whatever standard we want to use, if we want to measure everything at 12, everything at 6, we want to measure some trees at 12, some at 6, some at 4.5. It's, you know, it's not a huge issue to me either way, just as long as it's technically correct.
The method of measuring spelled out?
Hmm?
Is the method of measuring spelled out?
Right now in the code?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
at 12 inches.
Yes.
And see, like, we do need to
And
write.
where's it start and where's it stop?
What do you mean, where's it start?
The 12 inches. My guess is I could
From
take.
the ground.
From the ground.
Yeah.
Ground with mulch on it or ground without mulch on it?
Yeah, I think we've pretty much agreed that we're going to add that little bit of language that the Planning Commission offered about doing it on the upside of the slope.
Well, see, now that type of stuff is covered, like the Forest Service, ISA, and I think like the European, whatever their version is, all have different ways of measuring, like multi-stem trees on a slope. So if we say, like that right there, the diameter of a tree measured at a 4.5 feet as defined by ISA standards would cover it. The last one there.
Okay, that's DBH. But you could apply the same concept to caliper and say the diameter of a tree measured at 12 inches above the ground as defined by ISA standards.
No, because the ISA doesn't do the nursery.
All right,
landscape industry.
then ANSI standards.
Yes.
That's why I was going for that little overview description.
But if you say, but you have to make sure that it's correct, because if you say at 12 inches as defined by ANSI, that's not right, because it's 12 for some and 6 for others.
And that's kind of where we went with option 2, where it's specific as to what the ANSI standard is, but it's not specific as to what the measurement is. And I had suggested that you would spend countless weeks drafting a website document that would explain that sort of thing. Or I'd give it to you.
It would not, see, that's kind of the point, is that these ISA standards and ANSI standards are not available. Most of them are not available.
No. I'm not suggesting you're going to put in what ANSI says. You're simply going to say, currently it's 12 inches. I don't think that's abridging any.
My interpretation of it, no.
All right. Well, I mean, again, I'm back to where we started before she got here, and that is the language in option 2. Just go with that at this point.
Can I just?
By all means.
Liz, the Planning Commission's draft back in 2014 they eliminated the term caliper. And everything was measured at diameter breast height, which they defined as 4.5 feet above ground, and they talked about the business about uphill.
Yeah.
We had a discussion earlier today where Susan was explaining to us that based upon her knowledge, and I think her conversations with you, that each of these terms has a different purpose. That caliper refers to a new nursery tree, and that diameter at breast height refers to a not other than new tree.
Yeah, like a tree already in the ground, not freshly planted, basically.
Right. So if that is correct, then I think I'm happy to go forward on that basis, because quite honestly, when I studied our tree code, we only used caliper. When I studied the Planning Commission document, they only used diameter at breast height.
Yeah, they took one mistake, tried to fix it, and made another.
That's what I'm now just learning. So good. So we'll get it right. And I think the only question is that the discussion we had earlier, which I thought had some merit about, as Jean was just pointing out, are you measuring this from, mulch or whatever? I mean, to me, some of the stuff is, but if it's better to reference the ANSI standard, the discussion we had, which is really consistent with the point you made, Liz, but sort of turned around, that if we're going to measure, if we're going to say that caliper is defined under the ANSI standard Z60.1 as may be changed from time to time, then we need to be certain that the public has ready access to that information without having to go to a professional and incur fees to find that out. That the city will have to have the ANSI thing in their office.
But we don't do that for any, unfortunately, say building code. It is every contractor's responsibility to have those $1,000 new set of manuals. They're not coming in and out of the city to borrow them like a library.
No.
They are available in the library.
No, but they have to be available, because otherwise, Mr. Decker, the next time he wants to trim his crepe myrtle, needs to have access to the ANSI code to be certain that he is not violating the new code that he has just had a huge hand in refashioning.
It's just a matter of copying that one section if it's legal.
Or simply
we can copy that one section and have it available for people to see it as a handout.
Well,
we definitely can't do that. I know for a fact that setting the city, having the library, maybe the city donating copy to the library would be a possibility, but we couldn't have our city offices as a library where people can come in and out borrowing one of the 15.
Not borrowing,
Just look at it.
and looking at it.
Yeah, looking at it.
And maybe if they have to, taking a copy of that particular provision home with them.
I mean,
we need to know. Let me just put it
that may
differently.
be where the line gets crossed.
Liz, you don't need to answer us today. You need to probably talk to whoever are the right people here. But we need to know if it can't be done, if it cannot be done, that the public can have access to a standard like ANSI, okay? Then we need to rethink what we're doing here.
And you're not talking about that much. You're going to be referencing it on 5 or 6 different things here that you would need a handout. It's like saying, okay, this is the sign permit. This is what the sign permit looks like, and you have a little sketch down that this is where it has to be, and blah 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 blah. And you can give it to people as a tool and say, here, if you're not sure, this you can read this. This is a little flyer that we have that, and you don't even have to copy the ANSI code. You could just, if it's illegal to copy it and hand it out, you could basically rewrite this is what the ANSI code says.
Just tell them.
No. Susan's on to something very good. As long as the description is consistent with the code,
Exactly.
we're fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys can do some internet research yourself. Some of it's available, like the A300 is available, but I'm not sure that the ISA individual booklets are available online.
Excuse me.
Yeah, the ANSI A300 standards for tree
What
care
about
practices.
ANSI
That's-
Z60.1?
It's divided up into, it's divided up differently. But basically what we're saying is, you know, if you're gonna enforce one section of one massive code, then just have a copy of it available so people can read it.
So we could show
Here,
it to
the
them.
2014 of the Z61 is available online. So there you go.
Send me a link, please. Can you send me a link, please?
Okay.
But
So
also
there.
keep in mind, it's 100 pages. So, I mean,
That's what
And
Susan was
And that's
inferring.
when it gets back to what Sandy was saying, do we wanna simplify it a little bit so people don't have to read through all that? But then if we do that and we simplify it to the one thing that ANSI changes, somebody's gonna call us on it, and who's responsible to see every year if the city code still meets the ANSI standard?
I mean, certain things like how you're measuring a tree, that's not likely to change.
Okay. So,
Things do change, especially with the ISA. They're consistently in review. You'll look and say if there's 12 sections, 3 sections will like safety standards, for example, are updated about every 3 years.
okay. So if we had if we had 5 pieces of paper and let's say we get done this code and we go back and Sandy's researchers go, okay, you've referenced ANSI this. And then the city simply goes, May 2019, updated May 2019. Here are the highlighted sections of these codes that actually apply. And it comes as a handout, not part of a city code that has to be changed by mayor and city council. I mean, that can't I mean, Liz needs to know it anyway to enforce it.
Yeah.
So as she's reading it,
Right.
she just summarizes the part that actually is applicable to what we're doing, and it becomes a little flyer that sits on the desk, and people that have questions can walk in and pick it up. If they want more information, they can call an arborist or a landscape architect who has the whole code.
A tree professional.
Okay? But for Joe homeowner, they get a little piece of paper, you know? I mean, if they decide to sue because they don't want to take a tree down, then the attorney's gonna have to pay somebody to find the whole ANSI code. But it's still done and decided for the attorney and for the person because it's what was in the code. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if Liz isn't sure what it is, she can say, this is my interpretation of what is in the code. You know, if you don't like it, then it goes to the planning people and then they can read it. But to list all this stuff in a code, and that's how this code became so messed up, is because everybody tried to keep putting everything in it without taking things out. And I can't see us adding to that down the road.
I accept.
Well, one thing that you've been talking about, enforcement, the city could not enforce the code unless the contents of the code is available to the people they're enforcing it against.
Correct.
Right. Which does not listing the ANSI say that the content of code is included? Now they can enforce the entire ANSI code, that section, correct? Because it's listed in the code.
It's like the International Building Code, or
Right.
the International Building Codes, because there's
Right.
a whole bunch of them.
Right.
They are adopted in toto by the city.
Right, so as long as
with
they
exceptions.
adopt these sections, then they are enforceable by the code without actually putting the verbiage in the code.
As long as the verbiage is available.
Right,
You can't enforce something against somebody if they don't know what it is.
but it is available. Again, it's
For free.
publicly available through ANSI, just like the building code is. And Liz is right. I don't have a building code sitting
No,
around.
but there's a set in the library.
Okay, right, there is a set there, and there's probably an ANSI set at a bigger library, okay? I'm sure you can go up to Philadelphia and find everything you need in a library up there. So is it available? Yes. What do you have to do to get it? Well, you might have to travel like you used to before the internet. So again, we can't include everything in there, and you're dealing too with 1% of the population that's gonna have a problem with this. You know, you're dealing with basically the lawsuits that are coming along. If I go in, I ask the city arborist, is this the right tree? And she says no, and I don't like her answer, then okay, well, I'm gonna have to research this a little bit further. And that's when, then you guys come in and somebody's gonna have to put out some money to get the rest of the answers, but it is publicly available.
Okay, I'd like to move along then, if I may.
I'm
You all right, Gene?
No, Hoyte, I have to tell you,
No,
I'm
okay.
reading Z60.1 right now.
Okay,
It's not so simple.
No, it's not.
okay,
Just in the section on methods of caliper and height measurement.
yeah.
So I think we really, I don't, you know, I'm just concerned about if we're, because this here, by the way, does not lock in at 12 inches. There are variations at
Right.
the height.
And, right, there are, and if you can put 12 inches in there on our code, or you can put something, diameter of new nursery tree measured at 12 inches specifically defined or altered as in ANSI code, something like that. But it still would fall back to ANSI, say at 12 inches, at 12 inches as defined in ANSI code. Maybe that would help.
As amended.
Or as specifically defined. So in other words, yeah, it's 12 inches, but if you want to get real specific about something, then you need to look at the ANSI code. You could do that. But I would still leave the ANSI in there.
I honestly am reading this and I'm thinking that I would rather come up with a specific definition to put in our code. And if we're ever worried that we are totally out of whack with industry standards, we change our code. Because I finally found section 1.1.1.2 of Z60.1 of the ANSI code. And it says that height measurement shall be taken from the ground level for field green stock and from the soil line for container grown stock, which should be at or near the top of the root flare. I'd be happy to take that one sentence and then say, you measure from that determination of ground, right? 12 inches above.
What the hell is a root flare?
Well,
Again, you're dealing
that's
with...
where the roots come out.
Oh, I see.
That's an easy one.
Okay.
Because this whole thing about caliper measurement shall be taken at 6 inches from the ground up to and including a 4-inch caliper size. If the caliper at the 6-inch size exceeds 4 inches, then you go to 12. I'm sorry, we're a small town. We should have a straightforward definition.
Okay.
I'm back where Liz was when she walked in.
All right.
We can determine what ground level is by reference to this and write a sentence or two, and then say it's 12 inches above that. That's where you measure caliper.
That sounds sensible. That's not where you measure caliper, that's where you measure
No, that's caliper.
DBH, correct?
DBH
No.
is 4.5 feet.
I would suggest.
We're gonna get to that in a minute,
I would
Susan.
suggest for caliper, if we're choosing one number, it should be 6, because most of the trees that we're gonna get planted are gonna be in the 2-inch range, not above 4 or above 6, so that if somebody calls a nursery, they should be able to ask for a 2-inch caliper tree, and whatever the nursery gives them should be able to meet our code.
So you're saying it should be measured 6 inches above?
If we're doing it for the intent, for what I just said, for city required plantings, if I call so-and-so's nursery and I need a 2-inch caliper maple, they're gonna give me a maple that's measured 6 inches above, depending on whether, most people aren't doing bare root because 2 inches is too big. So six inches above the base of the soil, wherever it's grown in the field or in a pot, 2 inches. So at a foot, it's only gonna be 1.5 inches, maybe. So what would happen is I'd be going out and every tree would be undersized if we're measuring at a foot.
So
You guys follow that?
except that I'm not sure where you want us to measure.
6 inches, if we're choosing one number, it probably should be 6 so that the nursery, it corresponds. Because then the worst that happens, say somebody wants to get a 6-inch tree.
6-inch caliper tree or?
Yeah, say you just wanted a big tree. We had that happen here where people, instead of planting 2-3 inches, get a 6.
Some of us were required to have 6-inch caliper trees.
Okay, but I don't see how,
Trust me on this.
wow, that isn't
Moving
relevant to
right
what we're
along.
talking about right now, but it's so, the worst that could happen then is that the tree is, I go there to do the inspection, the final, so they're waiting on their certificate of occupancy, and the tree is bigger than it was supposed to be. We don't want them being smaller, because I'm gonna have to go back to them and say, unfortunately, we can't pass your final inspection today, you don't get your certificate of occupancy, you can't move in, you can't rent it until you get a tree that is 2 inches measured at this point. So if we pick 6, we'll lessen the problems.
Liz, I'm still a little lost. So we're measuring 6 inches above the ground.
If we're choosing,
caliper.
if we're choosing one number, it should be 6, not 12. Yes, because then the trees we get from the nursery will be reflective. A 2-inch tree. So whatever homeowner calls up the nursery and says, "I need a 2-inch tree," they're going to be measuring that at 6 inches. The nursery will be measuring it at 6 inches off the ground.
That is
In spite of the fact that ANSI says 12 inches?
no,
for a
it
2-inch
doesn't.
tree.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
There's
okay.
all
Well,
these
then 6 is
variations.
good. All right. Okay.
But
That's
aren't
why
they-
I said I never read this before.
Aren't they gonna be measuring it from the top of the root ball that's gonna be buried under the ground 3 inches after it's planted?
The root ball shouldn't be buried under the ground. The top of it.
Okay.
Okay.
Hoyte, just to restate.
I understand.
No, just so you're,
Yeah.
the first sentence of what I read said
Yeah.
that you measure at 6 inches above the ground up
Forgive
to
me.
and including a 4-inch caliper size. So if what we're saying is that the
Okay.
standard, quote, standard replacement is 2 inches or 3 inches caliper for the new trees, then we should be measuring, even by ANSI standards, at 6 inches above the ground, not 12 inches.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like I said, if we
I got it. I
okay,
understand.
so the worst that happens if we go with 6 inches and somebody gets an oversized tree,
Good.
a 6-inch tree, then it, by our measurement, so the nursery will be measuring a 6-inch tree at 12, we're gonna measure it at 6, so we don't have any problems.
Right, it's gonna be wider.
Yes, so
Yeah.
we're good. That's what I was getting at. That's the
Okay.
worst case scenario.
We're gonna have to use the same definition for these measurements for demolition permits or tree removal permits.
Well, according to Liz, you're using diameter of breast height for removal.
Yeah.
This
Let's.
is only for new plate.
I'm ready to move on to DBH.
No. This is important.
Okay.
If I understand you, Liz, and Susan, because this is really important that we get this right. We're using caliper for new plantings, like a tree plan, replacement plantings, where there is a mitigation removal kind of thing, right? But we're using DBH when we're measuring existing trees in the ground, and we're talking about replacement either because of illness, death,
Yeah.
destruction, etc.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Why?
Why?
Just after you said
Because she's saying that's industry standard.
Two different standards?
Yes, that you measured a different place.
New trees are measured by caliper, existing trees are measured by DBH. Which is why I questioned why the word mature was taken out of the last definition.
To put it in plain people's talk, we're talking about the diameter of a tree in either case.
Right.
The difference is what we're saying is we want to forget all this technical stuff. New trees under a tree plan, trees that are planted for replacement purposes, these are new trees. Therefore, we are measuring their diameter at 6 inches above the ground.
Right.
When we're talking about a tree that's in the ground,
Right.
whether it is a private tree or a public tree or a street tree,
Right.
it is going to be measured at 4.5 feet above the ground. That's where you're going to measure the
What if you were
diameter.
to come in with a machine and pick it up and transplant it?
I can't, I don't know. That you have to ask. I don't know what that is.
What?
If you pick
Transplant
up a
a
tree
tree.
and transplant it,
What about it?
what about it? I don't understand why would you measure diameter?
Is that a new tree or an existing
Well,
tree is what he's asking?
If you wanted to do tree removal because you're building a house, but instead of cutting the tree down, you wanted to simply come in with a truck, dig underneath of it and move it. Then you're planting one that gets measured at 6 inches, but you're taking it out of the ground, measured at breast height.
No, you're not. You're not. That's the same tree.
I know.
It's not a new tree from the nursery.
In most cities, like in DC, where they have the really strong tree preservation, you might have to get like some sort of permit to move it, but it doesn't count against you if you keep it. So if you have a tree over like, I think in DC it's over 32 inches, you just literally cannot remove the tree. You can't get a permit for it, but you can relocate it on site. So it's treated, I guess, as an existing tree, not as a removal and not as a planting. And then if it died and you had to remove it, it would be measured at 4.5 feet.
So Liz, in the city of Rehoboth Beach, not in the District of Columbia, if you are doing new construction new construction, and you need to pick up an existing tree and transplant it onto somewhere else on your property, or maybe even on another one of your properties, whatever it is, are you measuring diameter in either case? Is that an issue?
That's not happened since I've been here, so I don't have an answer for that. But if it was an existing tree, unless the code says something different, I don't even know why you would need a permit to do it on your own property. I guess if it was moving to another property, you would have to, and I would measure it at four. If we changed it, I mean, right now everything's measured at a foot, but I would probably think it should be measured at 4.5.
So can I ask you a
That
question?
gets back to the using mature.
Can I ask a question?
Well, that's what I want to move on to next.
Before we go too much more into this.
Yep.
Are we changing the entire mitigation situation where if you take out a tree, you have to replace it with this, and this? Because if we are, a lot of this is relevant.
There are proposals that are in the drafts that change the mitigation provisions significantly, which is way overdue.
Okay, so is it still going to be if you take out a tree that's 3 foot DBH that you have to replace it with, 50 trees of 2-inch caliper or however? Because that's when these definitions are going to be as important as what we're making them out to.
And you are right on the money there, because Hoyte has a draft, I think you drafted that one.
Yes, I did.
Which talks about a much smaller number of trees for a removal because of the inherent horrible unfairness of the current provision.
But does it use the terms caliper and DBH still?
Yes.
Okay, well then we need to figure this out.
Yeah.
And again, as I said, it wasn't specifically on this issue, but we're going to come back to definitions later. And if we have to come back to caliper and DBH, we'll come back to that as well.
But Hoyte,
I think we're covering it.
I think these two concepts so drive so much of what's in the tree code that if we can agree among ourselves as a committee right now going forward, especially with Liz having pointed us to the right sentence, or not specifically, but by her explaining and then seeing the right sentence in the ANSI.
And the language you offered.
We agree as we go forward that when we're talking about caliper, we're talking about 6 inches above the ground. And when we're talking about any mature tree, we're talking about 4.5 feet above the ground. I think that's going to inform a lot of what we do with everything else.
Okay. And the language you offered before, I think we'll put in there.
And honestly, having listened to Liz again, and even thinking about Jean's example of the transplant, we need to leave the word mature in.
Okay. Well, let's hear from the expert here. I scratched the term mature because I felt that there were possible issues where you might have a new tree that would be subject to a removal situation. And so I wanted the word out. However, without even knowing it, you came in here and you said, at what point, you don't measure new trees, new nursery trees at DBH. And you kind of shot me out of my saddle on that, so.
How about we just say the diameter of a planted tree? Does that make you happier than mature?
Well, actually, Liz was using the term existing, And I kind of like that word.
Existing's good.
Well, no, existing could be in the nursery.
Well, no, I don't think mature. I think we'll get a lot of arguments if we leave the word mature in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Like a lot, because technically if a tree is considered mature, there is like a certain, I mean, a mature silver maple, for example, may be 20 inches caliber before it's considered a mature tree in arboricultural terms. So you have like the new, young, juvenile, then I think there's some sort of word for like an adult tree essentially, then mature, and then there's a couple other terms, but senescent or basically on the downward decline. But I think if you leave in as defined by ISA, that covers what trees should be measured, because the ISA it deals with established trees in the landscape, not brand new ones.
So you're okay
Yeah,
with scratching the
established.
term mature?
Yeah, I don't think you need, I think that definition right there at the bottom of DBH is good.
Okay.
But without the word mature.
Yeah, with maturity.
Yeah, I just did
I
a
don't
quick,
think it differentiates.
I
between
just
that
did a
and
quick
the-
search. I found other codes that use standing tree or planted tree, but I don't, so, but.
As
tree
opposed,
is-
as distinguished from leaning trees, or
No,
what?
but I
kind?
think tree, as
Fallen
long as we
trees?
refer to caliper as a new or nursery tree or whatever the other language was.
I think you need to
Nursery tree.
differentiate between the two. One needs to be a nursery tree and one needs to be an existing, standing, planted, whatever tree. Or people are gonna get confused, because I was confused until Liz
Existing, Liz?
explained it to me.
Existing, substitute the word existing, the diameter of existing tree?
I don't get the point in putting, I think the more you add to that, the more arguments we're gonna have.
Okay,
I don't think it needs to be changed.
all right.
Why did we put mature in it when we wrote it 8 months ago? That was the
I have
definition
no
we
idea.
came up with. I think because we have exactly what I said, it doesn't differentiate between the two types. I think that's why you wanted it in there.
Oops, I went too far. Topping. And so I think what we're talking, there is a definition that you see up on the monitor right now. And then there is a provision which was formerly 253.13, topping. And just for your information, Liz, what I did was I removed the language I felt was a defining sentence or sentences and put it in definitions, and then had the action language of the provision remaining in the tree topping provision. And so I think the question for you is it appropriate that we have, again, some reference to ISA or ANSI standards, either in the definition or in the action? I'll take it down to where it was. Bum, bum. Tree topping right there, you see it?
So the definition was fine that we were just looking at.
Okay.
That's a problem right there, because it only, and it's a problem with our existing one, and this didn't fix it, that it's not disallowed to top private trees anywhere in our code.
I'm sorry?
That still allows you to top private property trees right there.
Well, then I'm good with my crepe myrtle.
Larding is an actual arboricultural technique. Topping is, if you just define topping as cutting back to stubs of 3 inches, most crepe myrtles are not going to have 3-inch diameter stubs.
You missed that. That was the comedy part of the program.
I missed the good part then, the comedy.
Okay, so do we want to preclude topping on private property? I mean, should a person be allowed to essentially kill the tree by cutting off the top of it, even if it's on private property?
No, that it definitely should be disallowed in the code. I think it was an oversight that they didn't the first time.
So can you give me some specific, or you can do it later, you know, I don't need it now. But I would ask you, maybe you could offer some specific language to substitute in there.
Sure. Just look. I know I have something written for it.
We don't need it now.
Okay.
Substitute what?
Topping.
Topping. So Liz, at this point,
Make it violent.
I think we're going to move on, and I don't know if you, if you could come back later, maybe in another hour or so, while we wade through some more of these things, and then if we have some further questions for you. Does anybody else have any other questions that you want to hit her up with at this point? Okay.
Great. Dismissed.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah.
And if for whatever reason we don't need you, I'll.
When did you want me to come back? Time is it?
Maybe in about, like, let's say 11:15, 12:15, 12:30 maybe, something like that. We're going to go until about 5 today, so. All right.
Do we get a short break, Mr. Chair?
I like that concept. Can we do a little break, Ann? noon is to wade through the next several sections to get us down. Here. Spacing of trees. I'm sorry, wait a second. Let's get organized. Got ahead of myself. All right, I'm going on to the very next item, which is interference with the city arborist. And again, that's from the provision that was previously 253.17. And the only thing that I've changed is the term, I've removed the term Parks and Shade Tree Commission and substituted the word city arborist. So I hope we can come to agreement on that. And again, if this is in a spot where you don't think it's appropriate, we can deal with that later. I'm not concerned about the organization so much as getting these things through. So, okay.
Why does it refer to private property?
I'm sorry?
Why does interference refer to private property? Shouldn't have any business on property without a warrant.
Well, again, I don't believe I put that term in there, private property. I see your point now. You were a little ahead of me here with the pruning and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, you know, if you feel that we should, you know, either get out some of those specific terms, I'm good with that.
So, we're saying here that it has to do with the city arborist, formerly said Parks and Shade Tree Commission, engaging in or about the planting, cultivating, mulching, pruning, spraying, or removing of any street tree, park tree. Well, wait, we're not going to use the term park tree anymore, are we?
Nope.
So we took that out. So it says of any
So
tree.
it would be public tree.
No, well, you've changed it now. Removing of any tree. You took out.
Oh, I see, okay.
Street,
any tree,
park,
trees,
just
okay.
said any tree on
All right.
city-owned or private property.
Okay.
So I guess, Gene, the point here was that it had to do with if there was an issue, an action by the city arborist involving the removal of a tree, for example, on private property, or planting of trees on private property. I don't know.
I'm one that would take the position that the arborist has no jurisdiction on private property unless it's specifically granted, and it shouldn't be.
Would it help to put some language in there to further define it as in furtherance of actioning a tree removal permit or an application for a tree permit? I mean, with that sort of language.
Well, then you don't need this because the permit would provide the access.
Well, Gene, does it help you with the last phrase there?
Which
as authorized.
Where are you?
But in this article? No, that we're Hoyte has. I'm just reading double here.
My language.
Hoyte's this one.
This one.
See, as authorized in this article. So it would only be to the extent that it's authorized.
I mean, what if we change it around to say something to the effect that you cannot interfere with the actions of the city arborist in carrying out their duties or, you know, the functions of the office or something like that.
Well, let me tell you a different point, Hoyte. This term as authorized in this article, depending upon where you put this section, changes its impact.
Yeah,
Because,
I'm getting that.
No, hold on, stay with me a minute.
Yeah.
Because as authorized in this article, this was in Article 1.
Yep.
It was only public trees.
Yeah.
It wasn't private trees.
Right. Yeah.
Is there anything in Article 1 that deals with private property?
Nope. I mean, you caught me. That should technically slide down to the provision under trees on public and private property, if that's the way we want to look at it.
Well, no, but the current provision is only...
The original.
Is right
You're talking
now...
about the original?
Yes, it's in
sorry.
Article 1.
Yeah.
We're referencing Article 1. We're not saying in this chapter. Okay? We're saying in this article. This article, where you're placing it 6 versus where it was in 17, is still in the old structure was City and Shade Tree Commission regulations, etc. It had nothing to do with Article 2, which was comprehensive tree regulations. So this, in a way, if you're trying, I don't know what you're going to call your Article 1, but
I was going to call it administration.
Well, but administration of everything? Public trees, private trees, street trees? Because then this is more comprehensive than the current code.
I agree.
So that gets back to Gene's point, and it may be that if you think that there needs to be a provision that prohibits interference with the city arborist carrying out the city arborist's job, then maybe this ought to say it's unlawful for any person to prevent, delay, or interfere the city arborist in carrying out the responsibilities of city arborists as set forth in this chapter.
Okay. And that's kind of what I was leaning towards.
Would that work better for you, Gene? Because we then haven't said private property, public, it's just saying it's unlawful to, but then that makes it that you could, theoretically, if you did that, I just want to show you how this is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, carry it out.
Is that would mean that if you try to, say, go to the commission or go to the Park and Shade Tree Commission to stop something the city arborist is doing because you think it is arbitrary, capricious, unlawful, or you go to court, you're now committing a crime here. I don't know if we need, why do we need this section?
I like that even better.
Is there a reason we need it? I don't know.
No, I can't think of it.
I think you should take it out.
Okay. Command decision. All right.
Fewer words and fewer pages, the better. Fewer words and fewer pages, the better.
That's the mandate. That's the mandate. All right. So, trees, again, the next item is 253.7 on my proposed outline here. And I'm saying that should be another article, if that's the way we want to do it. I'm not quite sure how else to do it.
That's one reason I originally thought we should probably go through and do all the modifications we need to, and then reshuffle the articles, the paragraphs.
Yeah, that's the way I would.
And I'm open to doing that. But, I mean, let's take a step back and ask the question, do we want, I mean, in my mind, I think we do want to distinguish the different categories of how this ordinance applies. So there is a distinct, guidance for public property, private property, and both public and private property. What's your thought about that?
No, that's not inconsistent with shuffling the paragraphs after
Right.
we've got them all changed.
I think we ought to have provisions that we are satisfied with, and then we can figure out how to best place them and make certain that we're not overstepping.
Okay.
That we're properly applying things to what they ought to be applied to.
So we'll, with respect to 253-7 in my proposed outline, we will determine that later. How's that? Huh?
Fine with me.
All right. Progress. Species of trees to be planted.
Yeah, but
Doggone it, that's Susan's article. We can come back to that if you want to, but essentially.
I thought we had talked once before about that just being a list that's published and not part of the code.
It's reference to being available at the city website or the
right.
city arborist office.
Right.
I mean, as crafted here, are you all right with that?
Yeah.
Huh? Is that a yes? Okay.
Yes.
Andy, you all right with that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Damn. 253.9, spacing of trees. Going over here. I don't think I've changed this too much.
That's something that I think is up to the judgment of a professional anyway.
Sorry?
I think that's something that's up to the judgment of a professional anyway, either the arborist or a landscape architect or somebody. I don't know whether it's good or bad for some trees to be 30 feet apart. Or...
Are you suggesting we don't need a provision?
No, I'm just suggesting that it's something that should be done by the professional in charge of trees.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think.
Well, no, one thing here, Hoyte, is that if you're going to have these lists of trees and species done by the city arborist and posted publicly, then you have a provision here now that says the spacing of street trees will be in accordance with the 3 species sizes listed in 253.7, when we're not going to list them, or 58, whatever it was.
Right.
We're not listing them anymore.
It is referenced on the list that's maintained.
Yeah, it's reference to a list which is available on the website, or
Right. And well,
do we need to say that explicitly?
No, well, let me just stick with me a minute.
Okay.
Then the second thing says, no tree shall be planted closer than the following: small trees, medium trees, large trees. We don't have anywhere else in the code that talks about
references
small,
those.
medium, and large.
Okay.
And so, this is another one of these spacing things about. I think you want to have a provision about spacing. I think the spacing should be done in accordance with determinations by the city arborist, consistent with, industry best practices and industry standards, such as the American Association of Nurserymen standards, period. And not go into all this gobbledygook.
Okay.
You with me, Gene?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
That's right.
To conform with the American Association of Nurserymen standards, or
Well,
whatever.
I don't know if that's. Hoyte, my point was I'd give them a little more latitude. I would say industry best standards, such as.
Okay.
Because I don't even. Have you ever looked at this? Okay, neither have I. I know it's in the current code. So I don't even know if it still exists. Do we know if the American Association of Nurserymen standards even exists?
Well, we'll let, I'll make a note to get with Liz on that. I like the language, that's good. So essentially, we're gonna nuke B.
They're in Washington, D.C.
We're gonna nuke that B part, okay?
Well, no, I think you nuke a lot of it.
Yeah, no,
I think
I'm
you
gonna
just
craft a substitute language as you have,
First of all, this is only a provision relating to street trees.
yeah,
So I would
Right.
just say that the spacing of street trees will be determined by the city arborist in accordance with industry best standards, including those of the American Association of Nurserymen.
right,
And you have now reduced a lot of gobbledygook.
yeah. All right. This next one's a vitally important one too here.
You know, if 253.9 said the spacing of the trees, if it was said more generically, then we could get rid of 10, 11, and 12. The spacing is pursuant to the arborist or whatever. 10, 11, and 12 are just spacing issues, basically.
So get some language in there that gives her
Location.
some of the action,
Yeah, the location just has to be approved.
right?
I don't want to, I hate to be that guy, but in the current code, 253.9, which is not what it's your distance from curbs and sidewalks applies to all trees. Distance from street corners and fire hydrants applies to street trees.
Yeah, I can fix that.
No, it's in the code though.
Yeah.
So the question is this all applying only to street trees?
So,
all this stuff?
so
Because if it is, then you can do what Gene says, which is you can take spacing of trees, distance from curbs and sidewalks, and distance from street corners and fire plugs. So you can just have a provision that says spacing of trees. And then the section will read the spacing of this, I would have it the spacing of street trees. And then the provision will say the spacing of street trees, including the distance from curbs and sidewalks and the distances from street corners and fire plugs shall all be determined by the city arborist, consistent with industry best standards, including those of the blah, blah, blah.
I think there's a difference there because they're concerned about sight lines and visibility with trees that might interfere with, you know.
Well, the street corner one's the only one that talks about the 30 feet.
Right, but that's,
But
I mean, that gets away from the street tree is the point I'm making.
No, but, well, no, that one applies only to street trees.
Right.
The distance from street corners and fire plugs applies only to street trees right now. So, I mean, unless you want to make this more expansive.
Yeah, yeah. All right. How about utilities? Number 12. Before Gene leaves us, make another command decision here.
Well, in the current code, it's an absolute provision. It doesn't say unless approved in writing by the city arborist, which you have added. And again,
I may have gotten some of that from the planning commission stuff.
well, yeah. I mean, one way to approach this is to say, yeah, no street trees other than, it says small trees in the, so you did take this from the planning commission.
I think it did, yeah.
Yeah, approved by the city, species approved by the city arborist is what they had, shall be planted. Again, I think this is one of those things that if we decide as a matter of approach that things like the spacing from the curb to the sidewalk, the distance from the street corners and the fire plugs, the utility plantings, you know, the general spacing of trees that are on city owned land, if all of that can be subject to something that is published by the city arborist, so it says, here's our current operating provisions on all these things, then the code can be much simpler.
I can see putting those together, but are you including utilities in that as well? I think that's going to have to be a distinct provision.
Well, it says within 10 lateral feet of any overhead utility wire. If you want to keep that in there, fine, it's a separate thing, but that you're then dealing only with street trees, right?
Yeah.
And we have 3 different provisions to look at here. We've got the provision, the current code, we have what you've written, and we have the Planning Commission draft. They're all different.
Okay. Well, Gene wants to get going. Let me just say that I'll take a look at those 3 issues as you've outlined them, and we'll discuss this further the next time. So,
well, one thing you could do here, just to wrap up, Gene, you could just say no street trees other than those somehow determined, whatever, by the city arborist.
okay.
Because this small size thing,
it gets into that
right.
same.
Unless no street trees other than those approved in writing by the city arborist shall be planted within 10 feet of a utility thing or within 5, then that's fine.
Okay.
And you've not had to now rethink all that you just did.
Right. Okay. So just so you know, I'm going to post through 253.12 as a separate document. So we're not going to cover anything that's past that.
Well, you should circulate it to all of us to let us look at it before you post it.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to change anything.
Oh.
I'm just going to post it as it is. Okay?
I don't understand what you mean.
I want the public to be able to have access to the thing that we discussed today.
Right, but you should revise it in accordance with our discussion.
But no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do that later, and we'll have a full-blown revised edition of it. All I'm trying to do now is to get out to the public what we've been showing up on this monitor that they can't see. Okay?
Fine.
At 12 o'clock, this meeting was adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.